Well, good morning, everyone. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, whatever it is you celebrate at your home. 'Tis the season, I suppose. You've caught me in the middle of a little bit of tree trimming. The Thanksgiving dishes are cleaned up. The turkey is mostly eaten. I'm working on it. And I think it's time we shift into some winter stories. Now that fall is officially over, and it's the Christmas time, the winter time, the time of cold nights and dark corners, the time when the wrapping on your roof might not be jolly old St. Nick. It could be a guest of the show, our fabled Green Man, perhaps. Anyway, I hope you'll enjoy cozy horror. At least once a week, I'm going to be doing a little bit of, let's call it winter cozy horror, where we sit around by the fire and listen to some great stories. So, won't you join me here by the fire for some more great Christmas tales, some great winter tales, some less comfy tales, since they have to do with that cold horror that we often find this time of year. Some of us go on trips over the holidays, or during the cold months. I know I don't. I like to stay inside where it's warm, but maybe that's just me. Maybe you have family out of state, or you have someone special to go see, and if that's the case, more power to you. Though I do hope you'll bring me along and maybe introduce me. But the subject of today's story has traveled an awful long way in search of less holiday cheer and more holiday monetization. So, come hear about the exploits with me of our stalwart travel writer as he heads into the Toymakers woods. Some of you might remember me. I'm the traveling photographer who chases photos in strange locales. My story about the ghost grass hermit got the attention of a magazine that was interested in strange locales. It's not as much traveling as I'm used to, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't nice to sleep in a bed more than on the ground. I've spent the night in haunted hotels in Louisiana, shrieking forests in the Midwest, and looking for strange creatures in the various backwoods of the American South. So when I got the message about checking out a forest in Maine, I was a little hesitant. This time of year, the weather is likely to be frigid, and blundering into haunted woods in the middle of winter is no one's idea of a good time. The check the magazine was talking about writing me, however, was definitely a game changer. So I packed my stuff and headed out. I had time to read up on it while I flew from Tampa, skunk ape sighting, it turned out to be a homeless guy, to Maine, the home of the king of horror, and some pretty picturesque scenery. The locals claim that the woods were home to some malevolent spirit, it seemed. A spirit who made toys. Local legend said that the people have been finding wooden toys in the woods for years, the first being reported in 1860. After 1850 or so, there was supposed to be an old man who lived in the woods out there. An old man who sometimes came into town to sell homemade goods. He had the usual fare, bowls and animals and things, but his puppets were supposed to draw buyers from far and wide. He made enough from his hand-carved goods to live comfortably away from society, and most people just believed he was a harmless old man. One winter, however, a group of kids went missing. The town turned out to try to find them, but as the snow came down and the hour grew late, hope seemed to dwindle that they'd ever be found. They asked the old man if he'd seen the missing kids, and he shook his head and told them he would keep an eye out for them. As the snow piled up and the winter wind whipped, the people in town began to wonder if he had maybe seen the kids and just wasn't saying. Someone said a few of the boys had been seen talking to him not long ago, admiring his puppets and hanging around his stand. They began to get a little stir-crazy, thinking about the boys and picturing all kinds of unnatural things he could be doing out there. So in the dead of winter, they had gone out and broken down the old man's door, handing out a savage beating and searching every nook and cranny for the missing kids. Except they never found any kids, and the beating they handed down had been a little too zealous. The old man was dead, and when the snows melted, the town found the kids in a snowdrift under a makeshift lean-to that they had used to get out of the snow. The townspeople sure were sorry about what they had done, but when they went to dig the old man up so they could bury him in the churchyard, his body was gone. They said they had glimpsed smoke coming up the chimney as well when they approached, and candles that suddenly went out when they knocked on the door. After that, the puppets had started appearing in the woods. Some people admitted to having hung them in memory of the old man and the terrible thing they had done to him, but some of them couldn't be accounted for by the mourners. People went missing every now and again, too, and some of the puppets began to look like the missing people. The forest had since been integrated into the state park, and the Toymakers' cabin was one of the park's landmarks. It had been well maintained, as had the surrounding woods, and lots of people came to see the Toymakers' woods. When my plane landed in Portland around 3.5 hours later, I was raring to have a look at the place. It was another 3 hours in a rental car from there, heading up into the heart of Maine as I followed the signs to a little town on the edge of the Maslow State Park called Bucklouter. They were pegged as one of those rustic tourist towns, kind of like Williamsburg, but with less PR. They had done okay, I suppose, and it was likely thanks in part to the people who came to write stories about them. I rolled in right around nightfall and found people in long skirts and buckle hats closing up shop for the night. The tourists had either gone somewhere else or had turned in for the night, and now the blacksmiths and the hunters and tanners could go home and watch TV and eat dinner and get some sleep so they could do it again tomorrow. The Hog's Mouth Inn was my destination, and I was glad to see it as I drove into the parking lot behind the building. The snow flurries had been coming down for the last 2 hours, and I was very glad I had thought to pack winter clothes when I left Florida, which had been a balmy 72 degrees when I got on the plane. The temperature gauge on my car said it was about 32 now, and the tourists were going to be in for a real winter scene tomorrow, I had no doubt. After checking in, I decided to come downstairs and have a look at their after-hours show. The bar area was a series of long tables where guests and actors ate by candlelight and paid a pretty penny for the ambience. The place had a pretty steep price tag for somewhere I was expected to sleep on a mattress I'd expect to see at a Howard Johnson and eat vegetable stew with a bunch of guys in rough-spun clothes. But the magazine was footing the bill for expenses, and I decided there would likely be no better place for getting local legends than right here in town. So I sat at the bar, ate some lukewarm stew, drank a watered-down beer, and asked the woman in the apron if she knew anything about the legend of the Toymakers' woods. Her eyes went wide, but it was clearly not the first time that she had been asked. "I wouldn't go out there if I was you. It's a haunted place, and it has a dark aura about it." "So I've heard," I said, setting down the glass and asking for another. "So does the old Toymaker still leave the puppets in the trees?" She didn't seem to like the question, but it was probably the accompanying smirk that set her off. That smirk tried to tell her that we both knew better. I was still pretty sure this was something the locals were doing to promote tourism at this point. An idea I wouldn't be divested of for a while yet. "He does, as I think you know. You think yourself witty by making fun of our local legends, but there are still some things in this world that can't be explained away so easily. You'd think that someone like yourself, someone who'd seen the unexplainable and lived to tell, would be a little more open-minded." I was speechless. Had she read my article? "How do you know It's plain to those who've lived in the shadow of strange and terrible things all their lives. Let's hope you'll come out of the woods as easily as you came out of whatever it was you ran afoul of before. I finished my second drink in silence, the barmaid moving to the other end of the polished wooden edifice and shooting dark looks at me until I left my money and took my leave. I woke up the next morning to find a winter wonderland outside and had to make a trip to the local outfitters before setting out. One pair of hiking boots, some snow pants, and several other warm bits of cover later, and I was off. The outfitter had also sold me a map of the area, which showed the start of the trailhead not too far from the edge of town. It took a little longer than I would have liked to find it in the snow, but I eventually oriented myself and found the Toymakers trailhead. The snow had turned the woods into a German fairy tale, and as I made my way down the snowy path, I couldn't help but feel a little like some peasant kid trying to find his way home. With all that colorless terrain surrounding me, it almost felt like I was back in the ghost grass again. The sign at the start of the path told me that it was about 3 miles to the Toymakers' cabin. Not a very strenuous walk in the summer or the spring, but in the snow, it would feel more like 5 or 6. The powder wasn't waist deep, of course, but I was keenly aware of the crunch, crunch, crunch of my new snow boots as I made my way towards the cabin. I had my camera out and decided to take a few pictures of the expansive winter landscape as I went. I saw signs of deer in the snow, some frozen pellets, probably left by a rabbit, and when I went to take a picture of some long plants jutting from a frozen icy pond, I saw the first of the puppets. I've been saying puppets, but I suppose what they were was marionettes. I inspected a few of them and found nowhere to put a hand to make the mouth move. They were sitting in trees, hanging from branches by their strings, some of them lying on the ground in a heap, but all of them looked meticulously crafted and expertly carved. They were dressed in all manner of outfits, but a lot of them looked like they might be wearing jogging pants or hiking clothes. Some of them were definitely children, and seeing them hanging merrily from the trees made me remember the story that I had read about this place. Walking through all this snow made me wonder if this was what the kids had experienced as they trudged through that same snow, cold and hungry, just trying to get home again. The farther I went, the more it seemed like I too could easily get lost out here. I was a tourist, but I could imagine that even the locals would be hard-pressed to find their way out of here. All this white, all this ice would cover up landmarks and make it that much easier to get turned around. You could blunder around out here for hours just trying to find the right trail, only to realize that you'd gone deeper into the woods instead of closer to town. The woods were made up of birches and spruces, hardy old pines, and the snow bothered them not at all. They hung close together, bearing the weight of all that powder stoically, and amongst the limbs were the puppets that I had come to see. Always those infernal puppets. When it began to get dark, I realized that I'd been wandering this trail for hours. It had been early morning when I left, 8 or 9 at the latest, and as I watched the sun begin to dip a little, I started getting worried that I was lost. The map I had did very little to help. The area was unknown to me, and the landmarks that would have meant something to the locals were just so much snow-covered nothing. I still hadn't come to the Toymakers' cabin, and with every step I was less sure that I would ever find it. It was 3:30 by my watch when I noticed the smoke curling up on the horizon, and I headed towards it like a dying man towards rescue. I had hoped it was someone's chimney in town, but the closeness of the trees made me think it might be the cabin that I'd been looking for. The thought that somebody had hiked out here at first light to pretend to be some creepy toy maker made me want to applaud his resilience, but I was hoping that he had a snowmobile or something to get back to town. Hell, I would settle for a guide to find my way back to the trailhead at this point. Whoever was up here likely knew the way out at any rate, and I was cold and soaked enough to want to get back somewhere warm. My hands shook a little as I came up to the cabin, my camera coming up as I clicked a few pictures of the dark wood dwelling. It was a single-room cabin, nothing fancy by today's standards, but it was long and likely contained a loft above the floor. I could just imagine the workshop that must exist inside there, the tables and benches that held the creations, the wonders that he would create there, and suddenly I wanted to see it. I went right on wanting a peek until my knock was answered by something from a nightmare. The door opened with a long and ominous creak, and inside was less than inviting. The shadows weren't particularly long outside, but the inside of the workshop was pitch black. The face that leered out had an unsettlingly toothy grin to go along with its cold red eyes. Its body was undeterminable, the dark hiding it like a cloak, but its face loomed down at me like a jack-o'-lantern from a high shelf. He grinned at me from a space near the top of the door, and I felt my lower lip tremble a little as his eyes fell on me.
"Well, hello, traveler. You look cold. Would you like to come inside and sit by the fire?"
Its voice sounded like an echo from the pits of hell, but that wasn't what had decided me on backing away from the invitation. When the door had opened, a smell like wet copper had nearly bowled me over. It was a smell like blood, and I knew that if I went into that house, I would never come out again. No, thank you," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "I was just wondering which way would get me back to town."
"That way," it said,
and I assumed it must have pointed.
"I'd walk with you, but I can't abide the light. It hurts my eyes, you see. If you'd like to wait until the sun sets, however, I'd be happy to walk you back to town."
I shook my head. "No, thank you. My friends are waiting for me, and I must be going."
"Of course. Hurry along now."
As it closed the door, the portal creaked on swollen hinges, but not loud enough for me to hear it whisper,
"Wouldn't want you to be caught out after dark, now would we?"
I ran as fast as I could, using the puppets as a guidepost. Suddenly their height in the tree made sense. This thing had been crouching to talk to me, and I bet its arms would have no trouble placing those puppets in the boughs of the nearby firs. They seemed to taunt me as I ran, enticing me to hurry. The sun might keep it inside for now, they seemed to say through their painted smiles, but what will happen when it goes down? I haven't been so afraid since I lay on the floor of the hermit's shack, listening as I wondered if he would kill me. I ran as the sun set, and fate must have been with me that day. The journey that had taken me all day seemed to end in a few minutes, and I could soon see the town in profile as the sun set behind it. I raced the shadows into town, expecting to hear a howl or a scream as the darkness allowed him to leave his den, and as I closed the door of the inn behind me, I saw the patrons at the bar looking up questioningly. The barmaid, however, seemed to know exactly what had happened. As I came to rest at the bar, snow falling off my clothes, she set a mug of something hot down in front of me. Her look was knowing, like she had guessed what had happened, but it also looked sympathetic, like she understood what I had been through. It was pretty clear that she too had been to the cabin and possibly even seen something that haunted her to this day. "Don't worry, it doesn't come into town. Never has, not since our great-great-great-grandsires kicked in its door and murdered it for a crime it had no part of. It's called the Toymakers' Woods for a reason, and that's where it hunts its prey." I nodded, taking a sip of the mead she put down in front of me. It was warm and thick and good. "How many have gone missing in those woods?" I asked, not really sure I wanted the answer. "Not so many as you might think. Enough that the Forestry Service goes out with dogs a few times a month, but never after dark. It prefers to take locals if it can. It remembers that the townspeople are responsible for its suffering, and it means to exact revenge a drop at a time. To its credit, it probably kills as few tourists as it can. Tourists are usually noticed when they go missing. The locals know to stay out of the woods or to accept the dangers of going in. I stayed in Bucklowder for a few days, the snowdrifts making me afraid to take my rental car back on the road. By the time the snows began to recede some, I had a great article full of Bucklowder's history and lore. My editor loved it, my readers loved it, and it definitely made an impression on yours truly. I had a little more respect for local color after that, though it certainly didn't stop my editor from sending me to strange and interesting places. I'm sure you'll hear from me again sometime, but until then, remember to trust that funny feeling you get sometimes when you're out on the trail or hiking in an unfamiliar area. It just might save you from becoming part of a local legend yourself. I don't know. I think more of this popcorn is going into me than going on the tree. How about you guys? Does anybody still make popcorn chains? They were kind of a staple in my family, but I know that some people use tinsel. It's definitely less delicious, but ultimately more flammable, I suppose, though I guess it's less work. Snowstorms at Christmas were always one of my favorite things. Heck, snowstorms after or before Christmas were always one of my favorite things, but here in Florida, we just don't get a lot of that. But today's story might help you get into the Christmas spirit, if snow is something that you're lacking in your day-to-day life. Though, I hope if you go out in the snow, you don't meet Soap Sally. The storm was one of epic proportions. It closed the schools for 3 weeks, right up until Christmas break. 4 days before Christmas, that was when I met her. Better not stay out too late or Soap Sally will get ya. Mom called this after me, right as I went out the door to go play with Rob and Terrell. I rolled my eyes, slipping on my mittens as I grabbed my sled from behind the door. Sure, Mom, I'll be sure to watch out for Soap Sally. That was always what my mom told me. Her little attempt to scare me when I was a kid, I think. When I was younger, 4 or 5 maybe, Mom would use it to make sure I was inside before the street lights came on. I remember the first time she ever said it to me, the moment ingrained in my brain forever. I was heading out to play in the sandbox in the front yard, something Dad had spent all day building on his day off, and she had offhandedly told me to make sure I was in before the street lights came on, or Soap Sally would take me away. I had stopped, a little pail and shovel in my hand, and asked her who Soap Sally was. My mother just shrugged and said it was something her mother had always said, and the two of us had used it as our kind of personal joke from then on. Better get the groceries in before dark, Mom would say. Soap Sally might get you. Better hurry up and take the trash out, Mom would say. I think I hear Soap Sally prowling around. We'd done it for so long, it was just kind of normal. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 12, and I knew Soap Sally was just a boogeyman that adults used to scare kids. She was no more real than the Wampus Cat, another of my mother's colorful stories, and I put it out of my mind as I ran to join the others. Terrell had told us that his brother had told him about a big hill near Basker's Pond. It's so steep that when you come down it, you almost fly, he said. So I trudged through the fresh powder, over the streets that no longer looked like streets at all, and made my way towards the edge of town. My hometown isn't very big, one of those 2 stoplights and a gas station kind of places you always drive through on your way somewhere else. There were maybe 20 kids my age in town, and our whole school could have probably fit in your graduating class. We knew we were living in a podunk town in the Georgia hills, and most of us dreamed about getting out after high school and doing anything but staying here. For some of us, that dream was actually realized. For others, the cemetery was all we had to look forward to. I met Terrell near Basker's Field, a small little picnic area that butted up against Basker's Pond. The pond wasn't huge, but it was a great place to swim and fish in the summertime, and just, kind of enjoy yourself. Today, however, it was a winter wonderland of fresh snow and chilling wind. Terrell was bundled up to the eyebrows in a thick ski jacket, and his snow pants had little rolls in them that made him look a little like the Michelin Man. He, too, was clutching a battered old sled, and when he spoke, I could see the air puffing from his mouth, even under his hood. "'Bout time. Where's Rob?" That was when we heard a loud yell from up the road, and Rob came running with a banana-yellow disc under his arm. He was wearing a matching ski suit and a pair of thick snow boots that seemed to be the only thing he wore that wasn't yellow. His voice cut through the sound of the wind like a foghorn, and I wondered if we were the only people in town not inside right now. It was a little spooky, even in the middle of the day. "Took you long enough," Terrell said. "Are you ready to sled?" "If this hill is half as cool as you say it is, T, then I'm ready to sled till midnight," Rob said excitedly. With that, we set off. We had all seen the hill in question. Overlook Crest was the place to spread your blanket on the 4th of July to watch the fireworks, or to picnic on, or to just sit and watch the boats as they went out there fishing during the warm months. It offered a great view of the water, and as we trudged up it, the hill felt twice as steep as usual. The snow made it slippery, and the three of us were laughing and pushing as we reached the top. Terrell won, of course. Terrell was a beefy kid, and he was harder to push down than Rob, who was mostly skin and bones. He set his sled against the snow, and when he slid down, he really did seem to fly. We spent the day on the hill, sledding, snowball fighting, making snowmen, and generally enjoying the day. Blizzards like these were rare, and we'd been having a lot of days like this where we were just free to be kids and enjoy our childhood. Sometimes we linked up with others from school to have snowball fights or play games, but mostly it was just Terrell and Rob, and me, of course, enjoying the childhood we had before it was over. We had all expected it to end when we went to high school, the dying place of childish things, and not one of us could have guessed that it might be something childish that ended our innocence. I didn't notice it was getting dark until the streetlights came on and sent a dazzle of diamonds up from the snow. Ah, crap. Mom's going to be mad if I'm late. "Oh, relax," Rob said. "It's not like we have school tomorrow. As long as you're home before bedtime, why would she care?" Rob's parents were never home, leaving him in the care of his aunts or his grandmother since they worked late. Terrell and I, however, had mothers and fathers who would expect us home when the streetlights came on, and I could see Terrell shuffling nervously too. We were all poised at the top of the hill, preparing to race to the bottom, and when Rob saw our looks, he rolled his eyes and jumped. "Last one to the bottom is a baby," he sing-songed. We all jumped then, putting on a burst of speed as we tried to catch him. As we came down, I began to hear a strange noise, the rumble of something rolling down the street, the jingle of an almost merry bell, and the hum of a gravelly voice. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and that's when I saw her walk under a streetlight. It was an old woman, pushing a wheelbarrow or a small cart. We were heading right for her, and Rob was turned around backwards so he could laugh and mug at us. "Rob, look out!" He turned just in time to smack face first into the cart. We swerved to a stop, Terrell and I running down the hill the rest of the way. We could already see the old lady bending over him to inspect the prone boy, and under the glare of the street lights, he looked pretty bad. There was a big gash on his forehead, the blood leaving red streaks down his yellow ski suit. Rob was groaning when we approached, and the woman looked up at us, smiling feebly as she rose to her full height. She was as wide as she was tall, and she was nearly 6 feet. She wore a voluminous black dress, her hair caught in a scarf or a kerchief that trapped it against her head. Her hands were liver-spotted, her fingers long and spidery as they sank back into her sleeves. The cart she was pushing seemed to be empty, and I figured she was on her way to pick something up when we bumped into her. There was a bell attached to it, and Rob flopped back against it, making it tinkle merrily.
"Dear me, I didn't see you there, son. Are you okay?" she said in her thin, spidery voice.
We helped Rob to his feet, but he was shaky and hardly able to stand. I was worried that maybe he had a concussion, maybe even a broken skull, and I wanted to help him get to the house as quickly as I could. Terrell asked the woman if we could borrow her cart, but she said she needed it later and couldn't loan it out.
"But I'll help you get back to my cottage so you can call for help. I'll make you something warm to drink while you call your parents and let them know what happened. Put him in the cart now. You can help me push him back to my house."
I was hesitant. Mom was always clear on not taking rides from strangers, and certainly not going to their house. But Rob groaned and wobbled then, which made up my mind. Our town was so small, after all. We may have never seen this lady before, but there was very little chance that she would want to hurt us, right? No one ever wanted to hurt us, and despite all the lessons about stranger danger, we had never even heard of anyone getting kidnapped. We loaded Rob into the wagon, the bell jingling as he slid in, and pushed it back the way we had come. As it turned out, the woman lived in the woods behind Basker's Park. The tires rumbled over the wood chips that led to her house, and Rob groaned as we jostled him in the cart. We had left our sleds behind, and we moved unburdened towards the dark little cabin at the end of the long road. It looked spooky at night, not a candle or a light inside. "You can push him right in the front door," she gravelled out. As we neared, something screamed at me not to go inside that house, though. Common sense seemed to have reasserted itself, and when I paused on the steps to the front porch, the old woman and Terrell barely noticed. As the door came open, I could smell something like wax melting, a warm, aromatic smell of tallow. There were floral smells as well, and something akin to the cooking of bacon fat. There was another smell, though, something that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. A coppery smell. A wet smell. And when I took a step back, the old woman seemed to notice that I hadn't come inside. She turned in the doorway, and we made eye contact for a few seconds before she asked why I wasn't coming in. I just remembered that I thought of something, anything, and landed on a flimsy lie. "My dad, he's coming to pick us up, and if he gets there and we're gone, he'll be worried. I probably need to..." I turned to go back down the cedar path, but suddenly her hand was around my wrist. I felt my breath catch as I looked down at those long, spidery fingers. The bones creaked beneath her skin, and the flesh around them was so thin that I imagined I could see them through the pale wrapper. As firm as her grip was, her skin was waxy and slick. It reminded me of nothing so much as candle wax, heated tallow, and when I looked into her face, I could see nothing human there. Her face looked like an exceptionally well-crafted mask, a mask made of human skin. "Come inside," she whispered, and I could see that her mask bore too much makeup. She had really caked it on, and it made her look almost clownish. Whoever had applied it roughly. Her eyes were like black pits beneath all that dark eyeshadow. I whispered, my tongue now dry as it battered against my chapped lips. "I just need to tell my dad where "Your father can't help you now," she breathed, grinning with her mouth full of gravestone teeth. "Don't worry. You'll see him very soon." She yanked my arm then, and I saw my one chance to escape. I pulled back hard, nearly toppling her from the porch, my arm slipping out of her greasy grip. I was running flat out as she cawed angrily behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. My mom was waiting for me on the porch, looking angry as I came running up. She asked what I thought I was doing out so late. She asked if I meant to meet Soap Sally, as she always joked about. She asked me if I intended to freeze to death out in the snow. All those questions went unanswered. All her anger disappeared as I wrapped my arms around her and told her that some old lady had taken Terrell and Rob. She called the police, but seemed angry when she hung up. She told me that they must have thought she was someone pulling a prank. They told her that they would get right on that, and the next time Soap Sally came after her to make sure there was less than a foot of snow on the ground. She sent me to bed, but my dreams were full of the old woman and her deep, pitiless eyes. In my dreams, she got me. In my dreams, she cackled as she peeled my skin. I woke up the next day to hear Mom on the phone with Terrell's mom. "He came home in a state last night. Said some lady had Terrell, just like I told you last night. Didn't you find anything? I'll ask him once he gets up. If he comes home, let me know, please." She hung up the phone and came to talk to me. The police came by later that day to question me. I guess they were taking the disappearance of 2 children a little more seriously now. I told them exactly what I had told my mom. Rob had hit his head, and the old lady had offered to help us. We put him in the cart and pushed him to her house. I got spooked and tried to run, but she grabbed me. I got free and ran to the house. I told my mom what had happened, and she called the police, but they didn't believe her. It seemed like they were interested in this house now and asked me to take them there. I gave them directions, but I refused to go anywhere near that place. They came back later and told me that the house appeared to have been abandoned for years and asked me if I was sure. I told them I was, and they said all they had found was a bit of dried blood and a black dress that might fit a horse. They didn't believe me, that much was apparent, but they believed me after the soap arrived. I woke up one morning about a week after Rob and Terrell disappeared and walked downstairs to the smell of breakfast. Mom was making flapjacks and bacon, and the smell turned my stomach a little as the familiar odors assaulted my nose. To this day, the smell of hot fat makes me want to puke, and the smell of it always takes me back to that house and that day. "Sweetie, could you bring the milk in off the front porch?" I looked outside. "Snow's 3 feet deep, Mom. I doubt the milkman ran today." "Well, I heard someone on the porch a few minutes ago. They left something and didn't knock. See if it's the milk before it freezes, please." Sitting on the mat was a small wicker basket. Sitting on a bed of black cloth were square packages wrapped in wax paper. I felt my breath hitch as I saw the cloth, but tried to shake it off. What didn't remind me of the old woman in the woods these days? I reached down to pick up the package and felt the semi-solid brick of soap as it smooshed a little between my fingers. I unwrapped it, not sure who would leave soap on the doorstep, and that's when I saw the note. It was under the soap, written in a long, spidery hand, and the words sent a shudder through me that the winter chill couldn't top. "See you soon." I felt the soap slip from my numb fingers. When it hit the boards, I looked down and saw something that pushed a scream up my throat. It was a bone. A finger bone. The police told my dad that it was Rob's finger bone, but they found trace evidence of Terrell's bones in the other bar of soap. Both their parents had received similar baskets of soap, and, unfortunately, Rob's grandmother had brought it out of the bathroom when the police came to check. She had been washing her hands with it all day, having no clue that she was washing her hands with her grandson's body. My own grandmother came to visit a few days later. She and Mom had a long talk about something, and I got the feeling that Mom didn't want her to tell me something. As she shuffled to my room, I couldn't help but shudder as I imagined my door opening to reveal a huge woman in a black dress and a shawl leering at me as she smiled with her witch's grin. When Grandma knocked, I told her to come in. She sat down on the bed and seemed to think about what she meant to say. "I grew up in this town, too. You know that. One night, my friend Grace and I were late coming home from a church dance. We cut through the park, and as we passed by the sign that said, 'Welcome to Basker's Park,' we saw an old woman who was trying to fix her cart. She asked us to help her get the cart to her house, and we obliged. No sooner had I seen her house, though, than I got a tickling feeling. My mother had told me about Soap Sally, too, and I suddenly realized what the smell was around that cart. It was tallow and lye and blood. I ran as quick as I could, and I never saw my friend again. You got real lucky, kiddo, but don't press your luck by being careless," she said, giving me a little hug as her bones creaked in that way that Soap Sally's had. She left me then, and we never spoke about it again. That was 5 years ago. 5 long winters ago. The snow is back, and the days are short, but I haven't left my house after dark, not since that night I lost my best friends. Though I never saw her again, I know she has seen me. Sometimes I hear the grumble of that cart, the tinkle of the bell, and it sends me running home as surely as it did the night I escaped her. My greatest fear is that she will make good on her threat one day. One day, Soap Sally may leave me on my parents' front porch, their missing son unknowingly come home. Better go grab another blanket for this next one. If ever oh ever there was a chilly tale, this one is a chilly one. We all have certain spooky monuments in our town. If you live around where I do, it's the Martin House, or the cemetery down off of 15th, the one with the ghost lights some nights. But these are far from the site of great tragedies, not like the site I'm going to talk about today. So if you're out late walking the streets, be sure you don't run afoul of the kids from Orwin Woods. The job at the gas station was a blessing when they called me, but it would become something of a megrim before I finally quit. I worked the closing shift at the Fill and Go for the better part of 8 months, and it was 8 months of making coffee, stocking coolers, and listening to weary women with too many children argue about what you could and couldn't buy with EBT. My first job was construction, working as a carpenter's assistant until I was 16, and after the big layoff during the pandemic, I was tempted to go back. The amount of construction work hadn't changed, but the call for laborers had waned, it seemed. Suddenly, I was forced to look elsewhere for work, and my savings were starting to get dangerously low. That's when the fill-and-go finally called me. The worst part about the job wasn't even the job itself. Not really. The worst part was the walk home when the day was done. I live in the Shady Oaks trailer court, about 3 blocks from the gas station, and it just made sense to walk to work. I didn't have a car. It was one of the first things to get repoed when I was out of work, so if I needed groceries or booze or just a bite to eat, I was walking. It wasn't much of a problem. I liked to walk, but it was the sights that made the walk unbearable, especially at night. Walking past Orwin Woods in the middle of the night was enough to give anybody the shivers. Orwin Wood had existed long before the children's home that had given it its name, but the long-gone orphanage is why it was infamous. Established in 1890, Orwin Children's Home was a place for cast-off children from all over. The rambling plantation home, lovingly donated by Mrs. Orwin before she died, boasted 30 acres, complete with a barn, field for growing, and a pond for fishing and swimming, and a lot of room for rowdy growing kids, of course. At its peak, it had held some 120 kids, and had been a place of new beginnings and fresh starts for many of the lost boys and girls in the area. Those were not the reasons it was remembered, however. The reason it was still whispered about at fireside stories was the fire of 42. By 1942, the orphanage had finally fallen into disrepair. They had some 30-odd kids they were caring for, and the consensus was that the fire may have been set for reasons of insurance fraud. Others claim it was a candle that was left lit in a bedroom, or a stray spark from the fireplace. But however it was started, the results had been devastating. 30 people lost their lives in the fire, 25 of them children, and that was when the stories began. You could still see the ruins of the children's home as it hulked in the undergrowth, reclaimed by the forest after the blaze, and the area around the hulk was supposed to be very haunted. Lots of people had seen ghostly apparitions, handprints on the dirt on their cars, or had toys glide into the road without warning. The Orwin Woods played in a lot of local legends, and it was widely agreed upon to be a haunted place. I explain all this so you understand why I might have been a little eager to get home on my evening walks. Nothing strange had ever happened to me, nothing besides that feeling of unseen eyes watching me, at least not till last night. Last night, I got off work to find about a foot of fresh snow on the ground. I'd been expecting it. I had been watching it come down all day as I rang up coffee and gas for customers. I had walked to work through flurries earlier that day and had dressed accordingly. Still, I thought as I pulled my hood up and turned to lock the door behind me, that wouldn't stop it from being a cold, wet walk home. The dark gas station disappeared behind me as I started schlepping home, tonight's cigarette already between my teeth. It was a terrible habit, I know, but it's the only vice I can afford to have these days. Tonight, however, I was having a hell of a time getting the tip lit. Every time I would lift my lighter to spark it, the wind would pick up and blow my little flame out. Cold as it was, however, the shiver that passed up my neck had nothing to do with it, as I came even with Orwin Woods. I tried not to look as I walked past, the forest a dark shadow on my left. Like almost any night, I could already feel those phantom eyes as they marked my passing, and I kept my gaze firmly ahead. My grandma had always told me that when you sense the supernatural taking notice of you, it's best not to let it know you see it. Some things don't like being seen, Bug. Remember that, she would say, and it made a lot of sense on nights like tonight. I was still trying to get the cigarette to kindle, but the wind was keeping me from my evening smoke. I put a hand up to block it, but it seemed my fingers weren't even good enough for this capricious gust. The unlit cigarette was a good distraction from the creepy woods, however, though maybe a little too good. If it hadn't been for the snow, I would have walked home without incident, but I suppose I could have also unknowingly let something follow me in, too. Suddenly, I was done with the games. I was jonesing for a smoke, and I bent almost double as I tried to spark the tip. 3 clicks and a lot of cursing later, I managed to get the flames to stick. But as I took that first long drag of gaseous pleasure, I noticed something beside me on the sidewalk. It was a pair of footprints. No, not just any footprints. A pair of children's footprints. I don't mean shoe prints either. I could count the individual toes in these prints, and there was a line of them beside my much larger ones. I didn't know when they had picked up my trail, but I didn't really care either. Whoever had made them had disappeared, and I looked around curiously. It was 22 degrees outside, so my phone said when I left the station, and I was looking for the kid bold enough to walk barefoot in the snow. There was no one, though, and no footprints going hastily away from mine either. I was alone in the snow, though the fact that they had stopped right next to my own let me know I might not be as alone as I thought. I glanced back, wanting to see I'd been mistaken, and that's when I saw the second set. They had stopped about 5 feet behind me, but they were just as plain as the first ones. As the wind hit me again, I tried to keep my teeth from chattering. The chill I felt had nothing to do with the weather, and I found my eyes drawn to the new pair as they waited patiently for some sign. 2 perfect pairs of tiny footprints, sitting placidly in the powder. Then before my eyes, a third set came crunching towards me, and my cigarette made an angry hiss as it hit that fresh snow. I was running before that third set came even with the second, and this seemed to be the sign they'd been waiting for. I heard those bare feet as they slapped wetly on the concrete behind me. My head cried out for caution. It would be very easy to take a tumble out here and get hurt, but my desire to get away was up, and my adrenaline was coursing in the face of that formless threat. I slid as I rounded the corner, but my sneakers held purchase as I kept showing my heels. I could feel the burn in my chest as I ran, my breath steaming like a loco as I ran for my life, and I knew if they caught me, I would never see home again. None of the stories I ever heard about the woods spoke of children hurting anyone, but by the sound of those ghostly feet, I guess they weren't going to sell me cookies. By the sound of it, there were more than a dozen of them after me, and I could just imagine the intention of this legion. I saw the trailer park coming into sight, but that seemed to be where my luck ran out. I came off the curb, running flat out, and when I hit a patch of ice, I stumbled and went down hard on my outstretched hands. I was lucky, I suppose. If I'd hit my head and gone unconscious, there's no telling if I would have ever woken up again. As it was, I just gashed my hands on the concrete beneath. I could still hear them behind me, getting closer and closer, and I walked on my hands and knees until I got across the street and managed to right myself. I was running up the narrow walkway, dashing between the trailers as I saw my faded red one coming into sight. I prayed the stairs wouldn't be icy, and when my foot touched down on the first step, I was rewarded with a groan and the firmness of unfrozen wood. I darted up the steps, crossed the porch, and rammed the key into the lock as I frantically walked into the entryway. I sighed in relief. I was home, and nothing could hurt me here. I turned and slammed the door, the screen door not feeling quite firm enough, but my hands stopped. I saw my breath as it came puffing out, and it felt as if it were thicker than usual. There were dozens of footprints in the snow outside my trailer. Some were in the yard, some were on the porch, but all of them led to the front door. It was as if all those kids had followed me home, each of them beckoning to be let inside so they could come out of the cold. I could just picture a dozen or more half-burnt children, the snow falling on their ruined skin, looking hopefully at me as if just asking for a place by the fire. It was all too much, and when I slammed the door shut, there was a note of finality to it. I made a mental note to try and find a new route home, but the situation, it seemed, had fixed itself. I was awoken at 6 a.m. the next day by my boss telling me that Dixie, his day manager, had called to tell him that she quit this morning. Run off with her damn boyfriend and good riddance, I say. You've been a solid night guy, but I figured I'd offer you a chance to come work days if you want. The position comes with an extra $3 an hour, but you'd have to start today. You interested? I was, and the forest seemed a lot less spooky in the daylight. I haven't encountered any more phantom footprints after that night, but I'll never forget how that ghostly mob chased me home one cold February night. I hope that last one didn't scare you off. I've got plenty more where that came from, so why don't you go find some warm socks and get a little closer to the fire before we proceed into the tail end of today's comfy horror. There's no easy way to put it. Drinking in the snow is never really fun. Oh, it's fun while you're doing it, but it's never really something you want to wake up from the next day and discover that it's how you've spent your evening. If you're fond of the practice, though, be sure that you're being safe and you have someone who can help get you home. Otherwise, you might find yourself leaving footprints in the snow.
Come on, just one more drink. You know I'm good for it. The bartender looked at me evenly. His dark eyes slitted as he tried to hide his frustration. I know no such thing. You still got money on your books from last week, and you dare to come in here flaunting your wealth? I was a fool to let you drink before you'd settled your tab. Now get out. The other drunks at the bar laughed, egging the bartender on as he crossed his arms. I wanted to argue, but the man was quite a bit larger than me, and I realized the futility of continuing. He would win, just as everyone did when they went up against me. So I hung my head and mumbled something about leaving. As I stepped into the cold winter air, I felt some of my buzz deteriorate, the derision of my drinking companions following me out into the chill weather. I was too drunk to be walking home, but it was my only means of conveyance. I live in Osaka, at least I did at the time, back in the early 2000s. I was not what you would call a solid citizen. I believe the word most of my culture uses for people like me is a NEET. It basically means I wasn't enrolled in school, wasn't working on a family, and I wasn't working in a job. I'd never been very diligent a worker or a very good student. The jobs I'd had were, well, menial, and often didn't last longer than a month or two. My grades had been good enough to get me into several very expensive cram schools, but not into college. With no real prospects, I'd settled into my life as a nobody. My parents paid for a cheap one-bedroom apartment in a part of town where you had to step over the winos as they stumbled home, and they sent me money to avoid having me come to the house and bring shame on them. I didn't care. All my money went to booze, or even less lofty pursuits, and I was essentially circling the drain. I suppose fate had another plan, though, because that was when I met a very special woman on my way home. I had been celebrating a small victory that night, but it seems that my luck had run out. I had a little extra money after my raffle ticket had brought a small windfall, and I'd been buying drinks for a few of the barflies in an effort to get some female companionship that evening. They had taken my drinks and laughed at my jokes, but when the money was gone, so were they. I'd drunk up all my extra money, and after having no luck mooching drinks from the usual bar patrons, I was forced to head home. It was early December, and the snow on the ground was only an inch or two. The black ice glistened treacherously from the damp pavement, and I was trying my best not to weave too much as the bracing air took some of my buzz with it. The streets were mostly deserted, a few late-night pedestrians here and there, and the lights were far from seasonal. We don't really celebrate Christmas in Japan, not like the Americans do, and the lights here were usually from billboards or the advertisements that lit the night as well as the street lamps.
I had turned a corner, heading from the trendy part of town I'd been drinking in into the less savory areas where I lived, when I first saw her. I stopped for a moment, not quite believing what I was seeing. It was a youngish woman, her black hair blowing in the wind, and her bare feet walking delicately atop the snow. She was dressed in some kind of robe, a wrapper too light for the weather, and I followed behind her as I tried to find the courage to speak to her. If she was out here and so little on a night like this, then she had to be as drunk as I was. Either that or on some kind of drug, but neither of that mattered much to me. There was heat in my apartment, and a little beer in the fridge. We could get warm together, maybe have a little drink, and watch the sun come up over the edge of my balcony. In her current state, I had little doubt that she'd be glad for a warm place to stay, and as I quickened my pace to come even with her, I tried to find my best opening gambit. "Good evening, beautiful. What's a flower like you doing out in the snow?" Now that we were even with each other, I could see her better. Her skin was as perfect as a china doll, her complexion smooth as porcelain, and her color as pale as milk. Her eyes were small and dark, focused ahead as she made her way towards wherever she was going, and it almost seemed like she was ignoring me. That was nothing new. Women often pretended they couldn't see me, but it was the little glances that kept me invested. She kept glancing at me with this coquettish look, favoring me with these intriguing lifts of her lips, and they kept me interested. "Aren't you cold? I know somewhere you can come to warm up. Your feet must be freezing." We were about 5 or 6 blocks away from my apartment, and she seemed to be heading in that direction anyway. I thought my luck might be turning around. The two of us kept walking, me chatting away as she glided across the icy sidewalk. She seemed immune to the black ice that sometimes tripped me up, and I began to notice how smoothly she moved. I know that sounds a little strange, but she moved as if her feet never touched the ground. It was like watching someone operate an extremely lifelike puppet, but it only seemed odd through the lens of memories. At the time, I was just a drunk and slightly amorous male who was hoping to trick this clearly intoxicated woman back to his apartment. I'm not the hero of this story. That should be pretty obvious. "What's your name?" I asked, realizing I didn't even know what her name was. But all I got in return was the same sly side-eye. Her face was utterly emotionless until she glanced at me and smirked. She seemed to know how to keep me interested, and I had become less flustered by the wind the longer we walked. I felt myself slowing to match her pace, my wet socks and cold feet no longer bothering me, and as we turned onto a familiar street, I realized we were about 2 blocks from my apartment. I could even see my window from here, the buttery yellow light spilling out onto the street through the dirty windows of the sliding door, and I smiled as I thought about how the sun would look as it came up through that pallid portal. When she turned suddenly, I almost missed it. We were nearly there, the front gate to my apartment complex, less than 20 steps up the road, and she had suddenly glided into the space between 2 buildings. The alley was a known haunt for winos and bums, and I found myself standing at the entrance as I watched her stroll into the semi-darkness. She'd captured me effortlessly, and when she spun preternaturally in the low light and crooked a finger at me, I was taking that first step before I could stop myself. Luckily for me, the black ice got me before she did. I slipped, falling on my butt, and as the cold rushed over me, I sobered a little. That was how I noticed that, despite the snow in the alley being deep enough to cover the first 3 inches of the garbage can or the dumpster that was there, she hadn't left a single footprint in the snow. I looked back and saw that the only footprints back the way we had come were mine, and that was when something hung in my booze-soaked brain. "Beware the Yuki Onna, my son," my mother had told me when I was very young. "Be careful that she doesn't get you while you're out in the snow." I had stopped on my way out the door, my sled under my arm and my boots unmarked by moisture as of yet, and asked her what that was. Yuki-onna sometimes hunt handsome men and try to take their life force. It stalks them through the snow, luring them away so it can get them alone, and freezes them in place as it draws out their precious life energy. So if a beautiful woman tries to take you away, come home quick and tell me so I can scare her off. She had said it jokingly, but as I sat in the snow, I realized I was about to do exactly what she had warned me against. The porcelain woman, the woman I now noticed left no trace behind, crooked a finger at me again, but I was up and running before it could waggle more than once. Fortune was with me, and I didn't find another puddle of ice until I reached the stoop of my apartment. I could hear her behind me, her scream, the roar of a winter wind, and as I rounded the gate, I came into the courtyard and expected to be pounced on at any minute. It would serve me right, I realized, as I came shakily up the steps of the front porch. I had thought I was the hunter, seeking my prey to lure it home, but I'd been tricked and ran afoul of a much larger beast. I stumbled on the ice near the door, fumbling my key from my pocket, and as I looked up, I saw her reflected in the glass. Her hair was no longer straight, writhing behind her as it rose like a nest of vipers. The wrapper now looked more like a funeral shroud, the edges tattered and dark with grave soil. Her dark eyes were now large and round, their centers full of terrible knowledge, and her jaw was opened much too wide as I slammed the key into the lock and rushed inside. I shoved the door closed behind me, expecting a loud bang as she barreled through it, but when I turned to look from the stairs, the courtyard was empty, save for the snowdrifts. I drank the beer in my fridge alone that night, realizing how close I had come to death, and deciding that it was time to make a change. I called my mother the next day and told her I needed help. That was 20 years ago, and my nights of midnight carousing are behind me. I went to cram school, got my test scores up, and started college. I now work as an engineer. My wife and I met in college, and we got married after she finished her doctorate. We have an apartment in a much better part of town, a son getting ready for high school, and my current life is as far from that apartment where I saw the snow woman as night is from day. I no longer depend on my parents, and I've left the rut that I wallowed in for far too long behind me. I still go out drinking with my coworkers sometimes, but now I'm careful how much I have before making my way home. On the night I barely escaped death, 2 homeless men were found frozen to death in that very alley. The news believed that they had succumbed to the elements, but I think the Yuki-onna was simply looking for a third course in its long meal. Some nights, when the snow falls and the leaves drift on the sidewalk, I sit in my apartment and just wonder if it's still out there, hunting the streets of Osaka for its next meal. Then I remember how lucky I am to have escaped the cold embrace of the Yuki-onna. One more story, and then I think I'm going to take all these cozy blankets and go have a little nap. Walking the dog isn't something that's usually fun at the best of times. Sometimes you just wish that they could hold their own leash so they could take themselves out to go use the bathroom. But sometimes we come across things in nature while we're out there that seem a little off, seem a little spooky. So let's hope that while you walk your dog, you don't encounter any snow bunnies. Washington State is a spot known for its snowy vistas and picturesque scenery this time of year, and my husky Max and I love it. The snow was part of the reason I moved here after doing my 8 years in the military, not wanting to see sand or feel heat for the rest of my natural life. I thought strongly about Alaska, but I wasn't in love with the price of supplies or the cost of living. So I moved here last February and got to enjoy a couple of months of snow before spring came in like a lion. The spring and summer were pretty mild that year, but I was eager to see the snow make a return appearance. By August, I was making preparations, winterizing my house, making sure I had ample firewood, and laying by supplies in case Max and I got snowed in. You know, the whole 9 yards. So when I woke up one morning to snow pattering down on the front yard, I was excited. Max and I like to take walks, usually in the evening after my shift at the pop-up storage where I work security, and today, Max was extra excited about the prospect of playing in the snow. He was waiting for me by the door when I got home, leash in his mouth and brushy tail wagging as he looked at me expectantly. The look made it very clear that he'd waited patiently all day to go for his walk, and he was ready to go blundering through the snow like the oversized puppy that he was. He had to wait for me to get out of my uniform and put on some walking clothes, but he bore it well. Soon we were traipsing through the winter wonderland, and Max was loving every minute of it. We stayed on leash until we got to a spot near the woods where I'd taken him before. It was a big open field that no one owned, at least to my knowledge, and when I let him off the leash, he was all smiles as he barreled into the snow. I'd brought a tennis ball with me, but after a few throws, he seemed more interested in something in the woods. I, too, had seen slight movement from the wood line, and as I watched him sniff around, something told me to clip his lead back on. Max was a good boy, but he was still prone to chasing. It wasn't too big a problem out here, but if he went blundering aimlessly through the snow, he could get hurt. I had taken the end of the leash, calling his name as I prepared to hook him up, when suddenly a perfectly white rabbit came bursting from the snowdrift. It was gorgeous. Its fur, the almost white of no color. There were some flecks on it, but I began to suspect that they might be dirt that had stuck to it. I was enchanted by the creature for half a second, but that was half a second too long for Max. He barked and ran at it, the rabbit taking off into the woods as Max ran off behind it. I took off too, cursing all the way as my feet crunched in the snow. I should have been faster to leash him. I should have known that he would chase when I saw the rabbit. But my hesitation at the sight of it had cost me. Max's footprints were pretty easy to find. A blind man could have trailed my dog pretty easily, and as I went deeper into the woods, I could hear him barking as he kept chasing that damn rabbit. I kept calling his name, hoping that he would come back, but the deeper I went, the more I thought I'd lost him. It took me some time. My adrenaline was running high, and I was worried about my dog, but as the sun started getting low and the woods started getting less visible, I began to feel something on the back of my neck. Not the snow. I had been feeling that for a while, but it was a feeling that something was watching me. As the sun sank lower and lower in the sky, I could see something big moving in the trees, just behind or to the side of me. I thought wolves at first, but I hadn't seen any report of wolves in the area. I knew there were bears, but they didn't usually bother people, and they were hibernating once the snow fell, weren't they? Whatever this was, it was bigger than any bear I'd ever heard of. I wondered if it might be a moose. They came down from Canada sometimes, but I couldn't think why a moose would be stalking me through the woods. Whatever it was solid white and making no effort to hide itself. It was like a moving snowbank, and whenever it saw me looking at it, the creature seemed to blend in with the white surroundings, making me second guess whether I'd actually seen it or not. I knew I had. I knew what I'd seen, but looking back to see nothing but all that white made me feel like I couldn't trust myself. I felt hunted, and that brought my survival instinct to the surface. A lot of my friends had come back from the war with PTSD or nervous conditions, but I'd been lucky in that respect. Instead, I'd developed a kind of sixth sense when it came to danger, and it put me in a state of heightened awareness. It had served me well in my time overseas, and now I felt myself slip into it, as whatever had my scent was stalking me. I kept calling Max, whistling and shaking his leash, but I was also being careful to listen for the sound of pursuit. A broken branch, a crunch of snow, the fall of powder as something brushed a tree. I was listening for them all, and the deeper I went, the more I heard it. Whatever was following me was not being particularly stealthy, and I got the feeling that it wasn't used to being challenged out here. I put a hand to my waist where I had a small hunting knife strapped to my belt, and I was very happy I'd remembered it. It wouldn't do much against something that big, but it would give me some semblance of a fighting chance. I stopped often, listening for Max even as I listened for my mysterious pursuer. Every 10th step I would stop and listen, call my dog, and proceed again. The crunching of snow remained a constant, but it seemed that whatever it was had decided to keep its distance. I didn't know why. It could easily have taken me at a run and buried me under its weight, but it was being cautious, and that gave me some hope. If it was unsure about me, then maybe I could scare it away with one of the usual tricks. I was trying to remember what the best way was to scare a bear away, and landed on making yourself big before I remembered that was black bears. Black bears were native to the area, but couldn't see one of them following me this far. If it was a grizzly bear, then I was probably already in real danger. The method of avoiding brown bears was to play dead, but if it was hungry enough, I doubted even that would work. If it was a curious moose, then God only knew what I was going to do. I didn't want to think about something like a mountain lion or a cougar. I knew they had big cats here too, but I wasn't sure what kind or whether they would come out in the snow or not. The western United States had a versatile grab bag of predators to choose from, and I was now ankle deep in the snow, being pursued by one of them. I stopped and called again, whistling loudly as I listened for Max, and when I heard a faint, familiar bark, I felt a flutter of happiness. He was alive, something I hadn't been entirely sure of, but before I could take a step, I heard a very distinct noise of the ice breaking behind me. It was followed by a second something to my left, and I felt my heart flutter mutinously. I wasn't alone. I broke into a run then, hearing them pursue me and not caring. I wanted to find Max. I wanted to get him on a lead and get out of here as quickly as possible. As scared as I was, and I was scared, I still didn't want anything to happen to my buddy. Max was just a big dumb dog. He didn't know that chasing rabbits could get him on the wrong side of something out here. I should have foreseen this when I was getting obedience training for him. If I was lucky, this would be a live and learn situation. If I wasn't, then I guess Max's next owner would have to do better. If he made it out, that was. As I ran, I could hear them getting closer. Sounded like there were more than two now, and the more I ran, the more of them there seemed to be. Sounded like a whole herd of whatevers by the time I caught sight of Max, and I put on a burst of speed, my lungs burning as something loomed up before me. I got a good look at my pursuer, and if it hadn't been so damn cold, I would have screamed. Standing between me and my dog, looking huge on its back legs, was a polar bear. It was bigger than any polar bear I had ever seen, a Kodiak-sized polar bear, and as it opened its mouth to roar, nothing came out. It lifted its paws to swipe me down, looking to bury me under its bulk, and I was helpless to stop. I could no more have come to a halt than I could have taken a sharp right turn, and I threw my hands up in some feeble attempt to defend myself. As I collided with the massive bear, however, I was surprised to feel not warm, wet fur, but cold, hard-packed snow. Hard-packed or not, my velocity took me straight through it, and the snow bear fell to pieces as I landed on the other side. I looked back, watching it break apart in total awe. And that's when I saw them. A pack had been right. There were 20 of the solid white snow bears behind me, and they had frozen like a perfect array of snow sculptures amidst the trees. Each was an intricately carved piece capable of winning a prize contest in any winter show, and each had chunky white teeth that looked anything but inviting. As I stood crouched in the snow, I wondered why they hadn't charged. Why were they just standing there? Did it only work if I wasn't looking at them? I didn't know, and I didn't care. Right then I could see Max barking and jumping around happily, and I wanted to get him back on his leash as fast as possible. Max was busy chasing the rabbit from earlier, but as he caught him and shook him viciously, I saw him fall into snowy pieces all around the dog. I ran up, wanting to get a leash on him before he could move off and maybe save the bunny if it was possible. As I came up to him, however, I saw that any body that might have existed was gone, and a new rabbit was slowly forming from the snowy ground. Max had bent to snap at this one too, but seemed to sense the approach of the snow creatures. Even as I attempted to coax him onto his leash, he growled, showing his teeth as his hackles came up, but I really didn't have time for him to test the stability of these snow animals. I'd barreled through one of them, but who knew if that was the norm? He acted confused as we ran into the woods, clearly not understanding why we were leaving, but as we ran, he seemed to think this was just another game. We ran flat out, trees whipping past us, and I could hear the animals coming up behind us. They weren't even trying to be subtle now. They were crunching through the snow like a pack of hungry animals, and when we broke through the trees and onto the road, I turned for home and kept hoofing it until our front door was in sight. I didn't let myself stop moving until the door was behind me and the locks were thrown. I don't go out as often as I used to, and after some research, I found a dog park in the neighborhood that I could take Max to. It's nowhere near the woods, and that seems to suit the both of us just fine. We had both had enough of the woods and decided that the snowy park was just fine. I did a little research and discovered that the woods I had run through often saw bodies turn up in the spring beneath the snowdrift. No one is quite sure why it is, but I feel like I may have some idea. It isn't just people either. I read the report, and they find a lot of dogs out there as well. Some of them have collars, some of them are strays, but there's a lot of missing people that are found with leashes in hand. I couldn't tell you what we found in the woods, but I'm glad to have survived it. It was one of the most frightening experiences of my life, and 8 years of that life was spent in an active war zone. No fear of death compares to being pursued through the woods by something that's hunting you for no better reason than sport. And there's nothing quite like being the prey as the winter wind deadens your lungs and the chill conquers your senses. Keep your eyes peeled if you walk the woods once the snows fall. Otherwise, they might find you too once the snows melt in the spring. Well, folks, that's gonna do it for Cozy Horror this evening. I do hope you'll come back tomorrow for a little bit more, and I do hope we'll see you tonight at the premiere of, well, whatever we have going on tonight. I'm sure it's great and amazing, and I'm sure that you'll just love it. Till then, thanks for joining us. This is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.